Hi everyone, another video for you here from our Quarantined Conductor Plays Bach Chorale series. If you're interested in what's going on here and how it works and why and all of that, I encourage you to check out the first video, which is linked in the description. But on to chorale number 2. If you just want to hear the music, I encourage you to scroll forward to the end, because before we get there, I'd like to dive into a pretty serious, gnarly rabbit hole. And I'd like to explore why the question, what is your favorite Bach chorale, is so difficult to answer. Now, the sort of friendly politician answer to that question, of course, is, well, there are 400 of them. How could I pick just one? That's not really what I mean. Even if you have a favorite Bach chorale, the reason it's so hard to actually say which it is because they're literally hard to name. What do you call each of these chorales? As I said in the last video, the melodies, Bach didn't write them. They already existed, and they'd be used for different texts all the time. And so usually when you describe a song, you know, your favorite pop song or something like that, the most common way to do that is just to name some sort of important lyric, Norwegian Wood or something like that. But in this case, we don't have that as an option, because people might know the melody with one text, and other people might know the melody with a different kind of text. And that same thing gets reversed as well. So the same words can go with different tunes. So if you name it by its words, by its lyrics, somebody might actually know it by a different tune than the one you're thinking of. So it gets really messy really fast. This is probably a phenomenon you're aware of. I know the first time I experienced it was with Away in a Manger, where I always heard these sort of away in a manger, no crib for a bed tune. And so the first time my young self heard the away in a manger, no crib for a bed, my response was basically, why is everybody singing this wrong? But eventually I was able to wrap my brain around the fact that the same words could have two different melodies. So to sort of get a sense of just how tricky this can all become, we have to do a bit of detective work. So let me actually show you the music here. So here's chorale number 2. First thing to note is that it's called chorale number 2 because it's the second one in this book. And it's sort of the order that Boyd and Riemenschneider put them in. As far as I know, no other catalog of these chorales is going to use number 2. So our first kind of technique that we could use to sort of label these in a way that everybody can understand is already in some serious trouble. But so let's look at our words. We have, let's see here, we have this title at the top, Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid. If you speak German, you'll notice that the English below it has nothing in common with that German, so that's a problem already right off the bat. We can look over here and it says from cantata number 3, Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid. Okay, that's encouraging. We have the same words in two different places. That's nice. But we'll also notice that that Ach Gott thing is not at all the first line from this chorale, Erhalte mein Herz im Glauben rein. Now here you might notice, if you do speak some German, that preserve my faith from error free kinda, sorta is a translation of this. It's sustain my heart in pure belief. So we can sort of come to a reasonable conclusion that that English title is sort of a poetic version of the German that appears in the chorale text itself. But it still doesn't explain where we get this Ach Gott stuff from. So a reasonable person might conclude, well, the name of this chorale is Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid. The name of the cantata is Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid. Maybe, we name the chorale after the cantata it comes from. Okay, so that'll be our working hypothesis here. Let's go back and look at number 1. This is the one that was from the first video. And we see another Ach Gott vom Himmel sieh da rein. And again, that English has nothing to do with that German there. But then we look over at, from Cantata 153, Schau, lieber Gott, and we see different words. The chorale name is not the same as the cantata name, so we're going to have to come up with a new explanation. But if you look down at our chorale itself, Schau, lieber Gott, wie manches Herzeleid. Again, that's sort of something resembling the English text there. That's look, dear God, how my enemies. So that's pretty close to what we see with the English. But here we see that the chorale text matches the cantata name, whereas before, the chorale text did not match the cantata name. So what is going on here? Well, so one thing that we can say with reasonable consistency happens is that the cantata numbers are pretty good. We can trust that if someone mentions cantata 153, everybody's going to talk about the same cantata 153. We can't do that for chorale number 1, but we can do that for the cantata numbers. So that's a good sign. The second thing that's really important to know is that cantata names, that Schau, lieber Gott, they come from the first words that you hear in the cantata. So these chorales are only part of the larger cantata. They're one section out of an average of about 7 or 8. And so if the chorale doesn't come first, then the chorale text will never match the name of the cantata. So in number 2 here, we have one name for the cantata, Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid, different text in the chorale. And that's because this chorale comes at the end of cantata number 3, not the beginning. But for this one, Schau, lieber Gott, this chorale actually comes at the beginning, and I think I mentioned this in the first video. That's really rare for the chorales to come at the beginning of the cantata, but sometimes they do. So that's why, in this case, the Schau, lieber Gott, that chorale text is the same as the name of the cantata. Really uncommon thing to happen. It just happens to be this weird sort of anomaly that the first chorale in this book happens to be one of the very few cases that chorale starts the cantata off. Okay, so that's all well and good, but none of that explains why these chorale titles are what they are. And to help understand that, I'm going to flip the phone back around here. So as I say, the typical way to name a song is to choose a prominent lyric from that song that people will know, that they've associated with it. And again, the problem here is that the same melody can be used for different lyrics, the same lyric can be used with different melodies. So how do you know which one someone's talking about in any given circumstance? The one that Boyd and Riemenschneider have chosen here, this Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid, is they chose it because Bach uses this text with this melody a few times, but it's actually not the most common one. You know, it's a very kind of subjective thing. Like, what is the most prominent text depends on your experience. So the most common name you hear for this melody is actually Herr Jesu Christ, meines Lebens Licht 2. So they've actually chosen the name for this chorale that isn't necessarily what you'd find if you go looking for this name. If you go looking for Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid, looking for the chorale itself, you might fail. It's much more successful to go look for this Herr Jesu Christ, meines Lebens Licht 2. Just because it has to be as confusing as possible, yes, there is a Herr Jesu Christ, meines Lebens Licht 1. And that is, of course, a different melody that happens to be sort of equally prominent related with that text. So you have two different melodies that are both named with this Meines Lebens Licht title. And that's, of course, not the end of it. A lot of people think that this melody is actually based on a very old sort of 15th century German love song called Ich fahre hin, wenn es sein muss. And so some people know it by that name as well. I've actually linked a recording of that song in the description. And if you sort of squint at it with your ears, you can sort of hear how the shape of it kind of matches this chorale tune. But it's sort of not obvious at the same time, and sometimes does different stuff too. So, and that leads us to problem number 600, which is that how much does the melody have to change before it's still considered the same melody? So in this case, as I say, Bach uses this melody in a few different places, and one of the places he uses it by sheer coincidence is at the end of the cantata where the first chorale in the book comes from. So I was saying before that this first chorale is really rare, that it shows up at the beginning of the cantata that it's in, and that most chorales show up at the end of the cantatas that they're in. There is still that cantata ending chorale in that cantata, and it just so happens by coincidence that the melody for that chorale, which ends that cantata, is the same melody that is used for this second chorale in the book, except they're not quite the same. So if you hear, this is chorale number 2 from the book here. So this version of it, for example, is in 4/4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2, 3, etc. The version of it that's used for the first cantata in this book is in 3/4. Etc. And so it's still the same melody, but it's going to be changed for every circumstance that it's in, either based on the mood or the words or something like that. So again, how much does it have to change before we consider it the same thing? So to recap, the names of the chorales as they are listed in this book are not necessarily the names that you would find if you went to find them online or something like that. They certainly aren't often going to match the name of the cantata. The cantata is, again, named after the first words that you hear. Chorales usually come at the end. And the name that you see for it, even if it is a good name, is not necessarily going to be the words that you see in that chorale itself, because the name of the chorale might have been given to it for some other piece that has nothing to do with the words that are used with it in this case. So, in any case, if you have not, in the course of your life, found yourself in lots of conversations where people sit around talking about what their favorite chorales are, you are unlikely to run across this problem in the wild. But if you do decide that you're going to get way into Bach chorales, and of course I highly recommend that, you should know that the first obstacle you're going to face is figuring out what anybody is ever talking about with regard to each of these. So, in any case, chorale number 2, let's dive in. So, this chorale, again from cantata number 3. This one was written in 1725 for the second Sunday of Epiphany. And as I mentioned in the first video, Epiphany is one of those holidays that sets off a new set of weeks in the liturgical year. And the second Sunday of Epiphany is when it almost always happens, unless Easter is really, really early. But it happened in 1725. And the readings for that week are about something like trusting the gifts that you get from God and using them to live your best life, something along those lines. So our text for this chorale, again, is the ending chorale for this cantata, is sustain my heart in pure belief, so that I live and die in you alone. Jesus, my comfort, hear my desire. O my Savior, were I with you. So here it is without the words. And with the text. Erhalt mein Herz im Glauben rein, so leb und sterb ich dir allein.
manches Herzeleid.